Alrighty, folks, we are going to change it up a little bit, talk about something we've only casually talked about in the past, but it will be an opportunity to learn.
Sure.
Excuse me. I don't know if you've heard, but folks, 95% of NFTs are worth zero. Jonathan, what does this mean?
Now, this is a topic that's very close to my heart, I have to say, because I have
Yes.
just loathed the whole idea of NFTs since they burst on the scene a couple of years ago. Knew that they were worthless, tried telling people that they were worthless, and generally was told, hey, boomer, even though I'm not a boomer, I got called boomer. Okay, boomer, you're just too old to understand like the value proposition in NFTs. And, they're all different. They're non-fungible. That means they're worth something. I used to just tell people every tulip was different from every other tulip as well. And we see what happened with them, right?
Exactly.
But people hear what they want to hear. But listen, so NFTs, this was a function of, like everything else, cheap money, the frenzy around sort of the everything bubble, right? The fact that people couldn't get yield on investments, they couldn't invest their money safely and get any kind of yield. Plus, there was the entire get rich quick mentality that had developed with, a lot of people, selling different things that they had bought very cheaply, so very quickly at a big profit because of cheap money. And NFTs were just, the intersection of cheap money and tech and hype, right? And there really was no way to value any of the stuff. And if you can't value it, it has no value. And that's kind of where NFTs wound up. And so, the thing too that always sort of strikes me about NFTs and crypto in general is, there's someone behind this stuff, right? And whether they start out with a nefarious intent or not, essentially what they're doing is they're getting people to pay them actual dollars for this thing.
For
that
smoke.
In the case of crypto, they say, well, it's money, it's digital gold, right? But they're taking the actual dollars from you and they're putting the actual dollars in an actual bank, and they're buying actual assets with the actual dollars in exchange for, like, if the digital gold were so important or so worthwhile, they would just hold it. They would never sell it. But of course they sell it because they want the cash. And the same thing with the NFTs. The NFTs were basically, think about all those people who like struck it rich by minting a couple of NFTs and then taking people's actual money and putting it in their actual pockets while they got something that was worthless. And, I said this at the time, but people told me I was an old-fashioned fool that didn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah, so folks, if you want to check out the report, you can find it on, just Google it. It's Petapixel. The headline of the article is 95% of NFTs are worthless. And here's some numbers for you. They studied 73,257 NFT collections. 69,795 are worth zero. And just give you a scale of scope. In 2021 and 2022, the bull run saw $2.8 billion in NFT trading on a monthly basis in August of 2021. Folks, this was Tulip Mania. We talked about it back then. We were both called boomers. It was pretty obvious that this was just super hype cycle. And a lot of you took your stimmy checks and bought NFTs. And if you sold them, you probably made some money. But if you're still holding on, that money's now zero. It's kind of a lesson learned.
Someone was left. This was a purely sort of speculative frenzy from the get-go, right? But again, based on, there's always a story, right? People always tell themselves a story, and the story is, well, every one of them is unique. Every one of them is, like it can't be duplicated or what have you. And the people told themselves this idea. It was kind of like .coms in the .com boom.
Oh, it's
right?
exactly like the .com.
If it had a .com attached to the name, it must be worth something. It didn't matter that there was no business model or that the business model wasn't working. And it was the same thing here. It's like, oh, because it's this new tech, it's worth it's got to be worth something. It has to be worth something. It must be worth something. And people talk themselves into it. And then at some point there was no greater fool to sell to. And the people who were the last fools, they're the ones who see it going to zero. And the people who got in early and got out early, got lucky, but everyone else got screwed. And I think, this is why you and I invest in real estate, right? Because real estate, there is an actual asset, right? It has an actual use. People need to live someplace, right? Shelter is one of the basic human needs.
Yep.
There is a value to it. It may fluctuate in value. It may lose some of its value. It's very difficult for it to lose all of its value, right? The asset itself. I'm not talking about your equity or whatever, but like the asset itself, very rare that it's going to go to zero. It's something that if you rent it to somebody, it generates a cash flow, right? But it has a residual value irrespective of the cash flow, unlike digital assets or NFTs or whatever that have, you can't value them because they don't have a cash flow that you can account, you can apply a discounted cash flow analysis to. So there's no, unlike a piece of art that they're compared to, you can't hang it on your wall. It's not a physical thing. There is only one, Starry Night by Van Gogh, right? There is actually only one of them, where the NFT, if the Bored Ape has got one hand up as opposed to not one hand up, and there's an infinite number of these that were generated, and you can't tell well, if his hand is in this position versus this position, it's worth more or less.
Right.
That means they're all worth the same, and they're basically all worth nothing. So, we invest in real estate because it's a tangible asset. And I used to say, even about tulips were a better deal than an NFT, because tulip bulbs, during World War II, the Dutch were digging up the tulip bulbs and they were eating them, right? You can eat a tulip bulb, right? So it actually has some value, but you can't eat an NFT. It has zero utility, zero value. And, so folks, if you ever see a frenzy around something, the first question you should ask is what is really going on, right? It's okay if you're a gambler and you want to gamble and you think you can make some money, that's fine. But don't do what all these people did and stick their life savings into these things, thinking that this is going to make them rich. If it's too good to be true, it is. And if it sounds too good to be true, it is. And just, this is a great example. And also, this is the kind of thing that you see at market peaks. Looking back on this, I think and I didn't recognize this at the time, so I'm not going to take credit for it, but looking back on it, I think the NFT phenomenon really should have told us we're at the top of the market now.
Yeah.
When people are buying completely worthless things and paying millions for them, that's the modern equivalent of, the shoe shine boy telling Joe Kennedy that it's time to buy stocks, right?
Exactly.
So be on the lookout for these markers, folks. They tell you something.
And again, this wasn't the first time. I freely admit it, over the past, I got caught up in the .com bubble, thought I was a genius, turned 7 into 200 grand, and then lost most of it. And that's why I did go to real estate, to your point, because it's real. You can learn it. You can find value add. You can understand, positive cash flow and, cash on cash returns. And I'm glad I did. That experience was painful, but it led me to a much better place. So I'm so happy it did. Where can people find you, Jonathan?
Well, actually, just one more comment on this, because you made me think of something that was, an interesting point. If you're looking at the difference between something that has value and something that doesn't have value, right? Whether it's a company or whether it's a piece of real estate, there is the opportunity actually to force appreciation, right?
Exactly.
You can go into the company and you can cut expenses, or you can raise prices, or you can bring in new product lines, or you can improve the management. You can actually force growth in the value of the company, right? Yep. With real estate, you can recognize things that are undervalued, right? And force appreciation by doing something to change the asset. If you can't change the asset, right, and it is not a piece of rare actual physical art, or a bottle of wine that there's only a couple of, or a coin that unless it is actually a true unique asset, those things have a value unto themselves because they're rare. But if it's something like crypto or NFTs or whatever, where nobody has the ability to actually go and increase the value of it, then chances are it has no value at all. It's just purely what people will pay. And if they decide that they're not going to pay anything, it goes to zero.
There you go. Jonathan, where can they find you?
Yeah, so come to apartmentinvestorsclub.com, get my free download, or you can come to Apartment Investors Club on Facebook and join me in the conversation there. And finally, we do have an active deal for our newest hotel. We're raising a little bit of extra equity for that. It's going to be a really fantastic deal. So come by Two Bridges Asset Management, just Google us, get on the investor list, and you can see the offering for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.